In this lecture, I'll talk about clarity at the paragraph level. This involves concepts like cohesion and coherence, which we'll talk about in detail. It's based on Williams and Bishop book, chapter 4. A lot of the examples are actually coming from that book. To appreciate what makes some paragraphs clearer and others not so much, we'll look at an example with two versions of the same paragraph. The first version is this. The basis of our American democracy, equal opportunity for all, is being threatened by college costs that have been rising fast for the last several years. Increases in family income have been significantly outpaced by increases in tuition at our colleges and universities during that period. Only the children of the wealthiest families in our societies will be able to afford a college education if this trend continues. Knowledge and intellectual skills, in addition to wealth, will divide us as a people when that happens. Equal opportunity and the egalitarian basis of our democratic society could be eroded by such a divide. Most people, when they read this, they'll say, well, it feels choppy and disorganized. The second version brings things together much better, much more cohesively and coherently, as we'll see. So let's read it. In the last several years, college costs have been rising so fast that they're now threatening the basis of our democracy, American democracy, equal opportunity for all. During that period, tuition has significantly outpaced increases in family income. If this trend continues, a college education will soon be affordable only by the children of the wealthiest families in our society. When that happens, we'll be divided as a people not only by wealth, but by knowledge and intellectual skills. Such a divide will erode equal opportunity and the egalitarian basis of our democratic society. Now, most people will say that this second version is much more connected. Okay, but these are, as I mentioned in an earlier lecture, these are non-constructive judgments. Let's look now in this lecture how to make a systematic revision of the first version into the second version. There are two underlying principles that we'll focus on: cohesion and coherence. Cohesion has to do with how sentences are connected to each other, to the flow in the paragraph, as many people would say. Does the end of one sentence flow naturally into the start of the following one? The second principle is coherence. Coherence looks at the paragraph as a whole and looks at the topic of each sentence. Do they form a small, tightly knit collection of ideas? And do these topics appear at the start of each sentence? These are the kind of things that make a paragraph coherent. Let's start by talking about cohesion. I'll give an example of two versions of the same sentence, and let's just look at it from the perspective of the sentence level clarity, the two principles we talked about, which is that we want the main characters to be reflected in the subjects, and we want the actions of those characters to be reflected in the verbs. All right, so the first sentence is, a black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star into a marble-sized point. Okay, so here the subject is a black hole, and the verb, well, the verb created is actually something not that the black hole is doing, it's something that the Death Star is doing. So we could revise this in different ways depending on what the character is. But if we decide that the character is a Death Star, for example, then because it's what's doing the action, then we can rewrite it. We can rewrite it using the protocols we talked about in a previous lecture. And we can say, when a dead star collapses into a marble-sized point, it creates a black hole. Okay? So according to those principles, just looking at the sentence level, we would prefer the second version of the sentence. However, now let's look at what happens when you stick the sentence into a paragraph. And the paragraph is going to contain 3 sentences. I'll give 2 versions where the middle sentence is going to be a plug-in of the black hole sentence. And it's going to be the 2 versions that we're going to be plugging in. Okay, so let's do the black holes created version first. So it's this one. Some astonishing questions about the nature of the universe have been raised by scientists studying black holes in space. A black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star into a marble-sized point. So much matter compressed into so little volume changes the fabric of space around it in puzzling ways. Notice that here we start the sentence with black hole, and that's actually what the previous sentence ended with. We also end the sentence with this small point, marble-sized point, and that's really what the second sentence starts with, about talking about how little volume there is. So here, this version works very well. Now, if we use the version that actually sounded better on its own, the paragraph is actually not going to work as well. So let's read it. Some astonishing questions about the nature of the universe have been raised by scientists studying black holes in space. When a dead star collapses into a marble-sized point, it creates a black hole. So much matter compressed into so little volume changes the fabric of space around it in puzzling ways. Most readers will have preferred this version we started with rather than the new one, because here, what's happening in this version, we're starting a sentence about dead star collapsing, and this is completely new information. It has nothing to do, at least immediately, with what the previous sentence is about. So there's kind of a gap where the reader holds their breath and is thinking, why are we talking about this dead star? And not only until the end of the sentence do you make the connection to the previous sentence, to the black hole. And now the reader understands the connection, but they had to hold their breath. There's a general principle about reader expectations. They prefer to encounter familiar information before they encounter unfamiliar information. In other words, you don't want to surprise the reader in the beginning of your sentence. Actually, it extends beyond paragraphs. If you do that, sometimes there's a time to do that, but you have to be aware that it increases the mental load on the reader. So unless you're specifically aiming for an element of surprise, you want to avoid doing this. If you're going to have something new, put it at the end of the sentence. In the beginning, start with information that's familiar to your readers. Now, this could be, as we just mentioned, just the end of the previous sentence, but it could be something more general, like things that are, it's not something you explicitly talked about before, but just through general knowledge, it's a familiar concept. For example, in the previous slide, we could have followed our sentence in a different way. So something changes the fabric of space around it in puzzling ways. Astronomers have reported that ... Okay. So, well, this is kind of, we haven't talked about astronomers yet, but it's sort of clear that when we talk about fabric of space, it's clear that that's related to astronomers. Okay. Now, when we have new information, we want to put it towards the end of the sentence. And this principle, this idea to put familiar information before unfamiliar information, it naturally leads to cohesion, because you're naturally connecting to previous sentences, and you're not surprising readers with some kind of disconnect where they have to hold their breath. Now, we saw in our example that the cohesion principle sometimes is not in agreement with the sentence level clarity principles that we talked about in the previous lecture. Let's just recall what those were. We want to make main characters the subjects of sentences, and we want to make important actions and verbs. For cohesion, we want to start sentences with information that appears in the end of the previous sentence or is otherwise familiar to the reader. Now, most of the time, they're actually going to be compatible. Okay? When we put characters in the subjects, then it's kind of naturally forcing us to start with familiar information. If we're kind of consistently talking about the same characters. But as we saw, we might have a conflict, and the point I want to make here is that cohesion trumps the first two principles. Okay? Cohesion is more important, it overrides the other two principles if there's a conflict. Okay, I promised a systematic way to go from one version to another. So let's follow this diagnosis and revision protocol, and let's use an example. Two aims: the recovery of the American economy and the modernization of America into military power were in the president's mind when he assumed his office. The drop in unemployment figures and inflation and the increase in the gross national product, GNP, testifies to his success in the first. But our increased involvement in international conflict without any clear set of political goals indicates less success with the second. Nevertheless, increases in the military budget and a good deal of saber rattling pleased the American voter. All right. So, first step is to underline what you think is familiar information. Okay? And you might want to pause here to try to do this yourself before continuing. All right, let's continue. Okay, first sentence. Two aims: the recovery of the American economy and the modernization of America into military power were in the president's mind when he assumed his office. Now here, I'm sort of, you could make various arguments, but depending on where this paragraph sits in the bigger paper, but usually we can say that people know that the president assumed his office. That's something that we've been talking before about. People know about the president, it's in the news, etc. While these two aims, these are new things. They're things that we're going to talk about in the rest of the paragraph. The drop in unemployment figures and inflation, that's new information, and the increases in the GNP, that's also new, testifies to his success in the first. Now here, his success in the first, now we're referring to something that we already presented. The first aim, the recovery of the American economy. So this is familiar information. But our increased involvement in international conflict without any clear set of political goals, this is all new stuff, indicates less success with the second. Again, now this is referring to the second aim, the modernization of America into military power. So that's familiar information. Nevertheless, increases in the military budget and a good deal of saber rattling, okay, that's new stuff, that's stuff we didn't know yet, pleased the American voter. Okay, here, it's not, the American voter is not something that was explicitly referenced before, but this is, as in one of the examples, this is a common knowledge. Okay, this is a common, let's say, common concept that people know, the American voter. Okay. All right, so once we've done that, you can diagnose the problem right away. The familiar information is at the end of the sentences, and we're starting with new information. Okay, so now try to revise. Use the old before new principle, and this should hopefully improve the cohesion. Okay. Now here you should be able to revise using some of the ideas from previous lectures about how you can make certain characters into the subjects and how you can put actions into verbs, etc. I encourage you to do this on your own and pause the video. All right, let's continue. Okay, so how do I rewrite the first sentence? We want to start with the president's mind when he assumed office, and that he had two aims. So I won't follow the whole revision protocol for the sentence, but what you would get is when the president assumed office, he had two aims: the recovery of blah blah blah. Now, for the second sentence, we want to start with success in the first. So we say he succeeded in the first, as testified by the drop in unemployment figures, and so on. Now we want to start with the second. I want to start the sentence with information about success in the second. But he had less success with the second, as indicated by our increased involvement in blah, blah, blah. And finally, we want to start with the American voter here. So nevertheless, the American voter was pleased by vast increases in the military spending, military budget, etc., etc. Right, so this rewrite is now much more cohesive. Now let's move on to coherence. Coherence refers to how the sentences are connected, not just in adjacent sentences, but in the whole paragraph. Do the topics of each sentence form a small, tightly knit collection of ideas? And do these topics appear at the start of each sentence? So here's an example to really illustrate the difference between something that's cohesive but completely incoherent. Sainer, Wisconsin. So as I'm reading, pay attention to how we're starting each sentence with something familiar, something that the previous sentence ended with. But as you'll see, the topics in the sentence are totally unconnected at the end. Sainer, Wisconsin is the snowmobile capital of the world. The buzzing of snowmobile engines fills the air, and their tank-like tracks crisscross the snow. The snow reminds me of Mom's mashed potatoes, covered with furrows I would draw with my fork. Her mashed potatoes usually make me sick, that's why I play with them. I like to make a hole in the middle of the potatoes and fill it with melted butter. This behavior has been the subject of long chats between me and my analyst or psychiatrist. Well, the flow is really nice, very cohesive, but it's completely incoherent, right? You start with saying Sainer is the snowmobile capital of the world, and you end with the writer talking to his psychiatrist or analyst. So totally, you kind of jumped from one place to the next, and you ended up with something totally different. Let me put it a little more less. So this, I guess, is a drastic example, but something that's more common is that you see that the subjects of the sentences are not related to each other. There may be one is related to the next one, but if you just take all the topics, all the topics or characters in the paragraph, they don't form this closely knit collection. They don't share common themes or ideas, and there's nothing even to help us connect. There's no topic sentence which would kind of put everything together, even if it seems unconnected, to somehow make the connection of why the snowmobiles are related to this author's psychiatrist. All right, now let's give a systematic way to diagnose and revise paragraphs in a way to improve their coherence. We'll use a working example. Consistent ideas towards the beginnings of sentences help readers understand what a passage is about. A sense of coherence arises when a sequence of topics comprises a narrow set of related ideas, but the context of each sentence is lost by seemingly random shifts of topics. Unfocused, even disorganized paragraphs result when that happens. Now, the protocol begins by asking you to underline certain parts of the paragraph. First, we'll we'll underline the first 8 words of every sentence, but we'll stop earlier as soon as we hit a main verb. So, for example, consistent ideas towards the beginning of sentences help. A sense of coherence arises, but the context of each sentence is. Unfocused, even disorganized paragraphs result. We'll also look at not just the main clause, but the other clauses, and underline the first 6 words there, also stopping at the verb. So we'll underline what a passage is, a sequence of topics comprises. Now let's look at what we've underlined and ask ourselves, do these things constitute a small, tightly knit set of related ideas? Well, this is talking about ideas and sentences. This is talking about a passage. This is talking about coherence, topics, context and sentence, paragraphs. These are not a small set of related ideas. Do they name, the second question is, do they name the most important characters? Well, we have to decide what the most important characters are. It could be paragraphs, it could be sentences, it could be coherence, it could be readers. We kind of have a choice of what to make the main characters. But since it's so different, even if one of these underlined phrases names the character we want, the other ones don't. So we need to figure out what would be a good main character, or what would be like a shared topic that we can make consistent through the passage. And there's different ways to do this, but one way is to shape the sentence around the reader. The reader comes up explicitly here, but implicitly the reader appears everywhere else. So, for example, a sense of coherence arises is really about, it can really be stated as the reader feeling that there's coherence, that the passage is coherent. And all of these can be viewed from the perspective of a reader. So now we enter the rewrite phase, which is going to be to rewrite this so that it's centered around the reader. And in particular, we want the subject to name this topic or character, right? And then we also want that these topics are familiar to your readers. Okay? In our case, the reader is, of course, a familiar concept, and we're going to thread the reader all the way through. Okay? We actually, our tightly knit set of related ideas will pretty much just be the reader. Okay? Now, to do this, we have to reshape every single sentence by making the reader, or something closely related to the reader, the subject. Let's look at the first sentence in detail, and the rest of the sentences you can look at offline. So here we want to talk about the reader and the subject. Okay, so reader, we need to identify the action that it's doing. Well, the reader is understanding what a passage is about. So we actually start our sentence, readers understand what a passage is about. And now we have to bring in the other part of the sentence, consistent ideas towards the beginning of sentences. Right? Now, here the subject is consistent ideas, but we want to actually try to make the subject the reader. Okay? So the way we can do it is to say the reader, or they, see consistent ideas towards the beginning of the sentences. Let me keep on reading the rewritten paragraph. They feel a passage is coherent when they read a sequence of topics that focuses on a narrow set of related ideas. But when topics seem to shift randomly, readers lose the context of each sentence. When that happens, they feel they're reading paragraphs that aren't focused or even disorganized. This is a much more substantial rewrite than the type of rewrites we've been dealing with before. we've had to kind of reshape all the sentences so that reader is now the character. But we've maintained the same meaning, and now we have a much more coherent paragraph. Let's do a second example. Vegetation covers the earth, except for those areas continuously covered with ice or utterly scorched by continual heat. Richly fertilized plains and river valleys are places where plants grow most richly, but also at the edge of perpetual snow in high mountains. The ocean and its edges, as well as in and around lakes and swamps, are densely vegetated. The cracks of busy city sidewalks have plants in them as well as in seemingly barren cliffs. Before humans existed, the earth was covered with vegetation, and the earth will have vegetation long and after the evolutionary history swallows us up. Right? So you might be confused after you've read this. I was the first time I read it. Again, if you kind of think deeply about it, you'll see and understand the connections that the author is not really making well, but they're there. However, we don't want the reader to have to go through this in our writing. Okay? So let's apply this coherence revision exercise. And I encourage you to do this offline, step by step, and then check in with the video to see if it agrees with what you did. Okay. First thing, we have to do the underlining. We have to underline sentences, the start of sentences, remember the first 8 words, and the clauses, the first 6 words, but stopping at a verb. Okay. Vegetation covers. Richly fertilized plains and river valleys are. The ocean and its edges, as well as in and around lakes and swamps, are. The cracks of busy city sidewalks have. Before humans existed, the earth was, and the earth will. Now let's analyze. Do these underlined words constitute a small set of related ideas? Let's see. Vegetation, plains and river valleys, plants, ocean, lakes and swamps, sidewalks, humans, earth. So this is not really a small set of ideas. There's clearly some are kind of similar, so vegetation, plants, but then you get things like sidewalks or ocean or humans. Okay. So then the question is, what are the most important characters here? And here you have a choice really of how to reshape the sentence, the paragraph. Well, the way we're going to do it, we're going to think about vegetation. Okay? So we're going to think, let's rewrite this paragraph with the shared topic being vegetation and things related to vegetation. Okay? Now here's the same passage where we've highlighted words related to vegetation in every sentence. First sentence, vegetation appears in the beginning. Second sentence, you have plants. That's close enough to vegetation. Ocean and so on is densely vegetated. City sidewalks have plants. Earth was covered vegetation, and Earth will have vegetation. Okay. So now we've identified these in every sentence. Now we can rewrite, and we're going to restructure every sentence to be around, to start with something related to vegetation, and to try to have that as its main topic or even character. Okay. So let's read the rewrite. Vegetation covers the earth except for those areas continually covered with ice or utterly scorched by continual heat. Okay, that sentence is unchanged because we had vegetation. Second, Plants grow most richly not only in richly fertilized plains and river valleys, but also at the edge of perpetual snow in high mountains. Vegetation is also dense in the ocean and its edges, as well as in and around lakes and swamps. Plants are in the cracks of busy sidewalks as well as in seemingly barren cliffs. Vegetation covered the earth before humans existed and will cover it long after its evolutionary history swallows us up. To do that rewrite would take a lot of effort, actually, and we're skipping those parts where we have to reshape each sentence according to making a new subject, something related to vegetation. Hopefully the things we covered in the previous lectures, in the previous lecture about clarity at the sentence level, in particular with the two principles of subjects and actions. Hopefully that will guide you through the revision process. One of the things you'll notice in this revision protocol is if you start your sentences with long side notes or clauses, then those first 8 words are not even going to let you get to the main subject. For example, you might have a simple sentence, acid rain has become a serious problem. But you might want to add things to it that are important or you think are important. Like in eastern states, since 1980, acid rain has become a serious problem. It is important to note that in eastern states, since 1980, acid rain has become a serious problem. And therefore, it is important to note that in eastern states, and so on. So something like the last version here, it's really a problem because you won't get until your main topic until way into the sentence. And so the reader, they're expecting to see the topic show up in the beginning, preferably as a subject, and now you're forcing them to hold their breath all the way until here. Right, so you want to try to avoid things like this. On the other hand, of course, you often do use these kind of structures. They are important. So the point is, well, just try to minimize how often you break this rule, and don't break it if it's not necessary. If you do break it, try to also minimize the extent to which you break it. So if you have something before the main clause, try to make it shorter rather than having it be this long. Okay. So let's take that last sentence and think for a second about how you can revise it. You can pause the video here if you want to do it on your own. All right, so here's what we did. We took away the and. We moved the since 1980 to the beginning because we thought that that's important to start. We took away it is important to note that because that's one of those meta discourses that really just gets in the way here of this sentence. And we moved the serious problem so we can have the verb earlier before eastern states. So some things we moved to, some of these things we moved to the end, some of these things we moved to the beginning, like since 1980 we moved to the beginning, eastern states we moved to the end, and some things we can remove. And the resulting sentence does have a delayed start, but it's pretty small. Since 1980, therefore, acid rain has become a serious problem in eastern states. When you get to very complicated things you're writing, you're often getting into a situation where the connection between the centered topics is not obvious. It's not things that are automatically connected. They're not what you would call a tightly knit group. However, there's the higher order connection, a higher order logical connection. For example, let's read the following sentence, the following paragraph. And I'm highlighting the topics of the sentences. The rapid deployment of 5G systems is revolutionizing communication by offering features such as unprecedented speeds and low latency. However, the advanced capabilities of 5G also introduce significant security concerns. To address these concerns, researchers have developed novel approaches such as gradient encryption and trigger authentication. The security properties of these approaches are founded on poorly understood principles of entropic algebras. Therefore, it is crucial to further study entropic algebras. Okay, so we have a paragraph. Now it's cohesive. One sentence flows from the previous one, but it starts talking about 5G systems, then talks about approaches for security, and finally ends talking about entropic algebras. So this is not a tightly knit group. 5G systems and entropic algebras are not a connected set of topics, but there is a higher order connection, which the logic of this paragraph dictates. And you often want to have this kind of paragraph in your paper. In these situations, you can add a topic sentence which makes the connection, the higher order logical connection between the topics explicit. It improves coherence, therefore, and you want it to be at the start, maybe the first or second sentence in the paragraph. So here's what you can add here. Improving security in new wireless technologies necessitates deeper understanding of foundational mathematics, in particular the rapid deployment of 5G systems, and so on. Here the reader gets a framework, a scaffolding on which to place the ideas, the topics that they're going to read in the rest of the paragraph. So the topics that they'll see, from 5G to entropic algebras, are now connected in their head explicitly by this first sentence. Let's summarize now what we've covered in this lecture. It was about achieving clarity at the paragraph level. One way to think about it in the summary is that readers have preferences, and you should try to meet those preferences. First, the readers find it challenging when a sentence starts with something unfamiliar, so try to start sentences with familiar information. That's what readers prefer. The best is to start a sentence with the shared topic of the paragraph, or with the info that ended the previous sentence. So this is the principle of cohesion, right? Second, readers don't like to hold their breath before figuring out the subject of a sentence. Right? So you want to get to that topic, the character, you want to get to it quickly. So you want to minimize sentences that start with long phrases and subordinate clauses, like what we just saw. And you want to keep subjects short, and if you can, keep them concrete. That's easier for your reader. Readers are confused when each sentence in a series opens with a different subject. So throughout a passage, focus on a tight-knit set of topics that define what the passage is about. And if you need, use a topic sentence if the topics are not inherently related, but are related through a logical progression.